It's kind of crazy to think that Samsung could be about to release a phone that looks like a normal phone, but it opens up, revealing an 8-inch screen on the inside. It could be maybe less than 4 millimeters thick with a 200 megapixel camera and a 4400 milliamp hour battery. And those specs don't sound particularly impressive because in the year 2025, we have devices like the Oppo Find N5, which have even larger batteries and better camera specifications overall than that, faster charging. And now Vivo is potentially about to release a phone that could make even the Oppo Find N5 seem, in some ways, a little bit outdated. So the source of this information is a relatively reputable tech tipster, Yogesh Barar, and they have an article that they sort of, I guess, worked with Expert Pick to make, but I'm going to be reading from my own article here on shanecraig.tech, but again, that is the source of this information. We're talking about the Vivo X Fold 5. And yes, if you're wondering, where is the X Fold 4? This is basically the X Fold 4. In China, I guess the number 4, the way it is said, sounds similar to their word for death, and there is some sort of superstition, maybe you could say, around that. So a lot of the time, these companies will skip number 4. We got the Oppo Find N3, and then we got the Find N5. There was no N4 for the same reason. So this is the sequel to the Vivo X Fold 3, and the specifications, if accurate, are pretty wild. So first off, we have a 6.53-inch cover display, which is going to be paired with an 8.03-inch inner display. Now, both of these are slightly smaller than what you have on the Oppo Find N5. This is a 6.6-inch screen and an 8.1-inch screen on the inside, but that is very, very negligible, just something to keep in mind. Now, under the hood, something that the Find N5 is going to have an advantage on is apparently they're going to be sticking with the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chipset that they used last year with the Fold 3. This does seem very, very odd to me, but this is what this tech tipster is saying. If that's true, again, that does give the Find N5 a little bit of an advantage because it has the newer Snapdragon 8 Elite. It does have one core basically chopped off for thermal and battery reasons, but I would imagine it's still going to outperform that 8 Gen 3. That could be why they're going with the 8 Gen 3. Maybe it's cheaper, and maybe they're figuring, well, if we're going to have to cut off a core anyways, we might as well just go with this one. Hard to say, but that's the report. 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage is standard, but also basically the highest of high end. Sticking with the highest of high end, we have a couple of 32 megapixel selfie cameras for the cover display and for the inner display, and then a triple 50 megapixel camera setup. A 50 megapixel IMX 921 primary sensor, a 50 megapixel ultra wide lens, and they don't give the actual sensor there, and then a 50 megapixel Sony IMX 882 periscope telephoto zoom with a 3x optical zoom. Just to kind of hammer home how impressive this is, if we compare the Find N5, which is 4.2 millimeters, to this Vivo X Fold 5, you can see that the camera specs line up quite similarly. So the main camera, they're both 50 megapixels, although they are different sensors. The telephotos, also both 50 megapixels, both 3x optical zooms, again, different sensors. And notice that Vivo's sensor is actually a physically larger sensor. And then for the ultra wide, Vivo absolutely stomps what Oppo just did with their measly, not very good at all 8 megapixel sensor. They have a 50 megapixel ultra wide. It's going to be a better sensor. It's even a wider field of view. So this is, I would assume, going to be at least as good as Oppo's camera system, and then in some ways it's going to be better than Oppo's system. And then if we move on to the battery, guess what? Instead of a 5600 milliamp hour battery that we've seen in the Find N5 or a 4400 milliamp hour battery that Samsung is using, they are allegedly packing in a 6,000 milliamp hour battery with 90 watt wired charging. That's faster than the 80 watt that Oppo has done. You must be thinking to yourself, they're one-upping Oppo in several different ways, so they must be much thicker. Well, they aren't. They're 4.3 millimeters when open. Yes, that is thicker than the 4.2 millimeters that we have here with the Find N5. but it's only by 1/10 of a millimeter. Okay, that is a teeny tiny amount that you're really not going to be able to notice. This is an incredibly impressive total package. Now, unfortunately, this leak does not mention things like availability, release date, or the price, but we can at least look at the Vivo X Fold 3, which is still, available to be imported for around $1,200. And honestly, that's not too bad. It's definitely not a cheap phone, but it's definitely cheaper than a lot of other foldables out there right now. But you do have to acknowledge the rising cost of importing phones. We have these crazy tariff things going on, and so you might order this thing, and before DHL can deliver it, you may have a bill to pay, which could jack that price up quite a bit higher. So it's something you're going to have to keep in mind with the X Fold 5 as well, which is, of course, going to be more expensive as a new device, and we just don't know what these other fees are going to be right now. You have to pay very close attention to that when you make your purchase. See where those numbers are at that exact moment before you go forward. I think for most people, despite how impressive this device does seem, it's going to remain something you're going to hear about and look at and watch videos about, but probably never purchase. And that leaves the door wide open for devices which are going to be much easier for you to get your hands on, like the Z Fold 7 or the Pixel 10 Pro Fold. Devices which I think are objectively going to have inferior specs in many ways. Even though Samsung's Fold might actually be thinner, you do have to acknowledge that the cameras, the battery, the charging, it's not up to snuff with something like what Vivo or even Oppo are doing. I'll drop a link to my article in the description down below, and in there you can see Yogesh's tweet as well as the full article from Expert Pick, and you can see all of these specifications sort of written out there for you as well. So definitely do go check that out in that description down below. Let me know what you think about this. How impressive is this device? Is this something that even with potentially high prices for importing, you might still consider grabbing? Maybe you don't live in the United States where we have started trade wars with every country on the planet, and you can just buy this thing at a, whatever the normal price is going to be. Is this device at the top of your list of most anticipated devices? I would honestly say that for some people, it probably is going to be. Vivo makes incredibly impressive devices these days, and their camera, in particular, just the tuning of their camera, from everything I've seen, seems so good. So yeah, this is definitely one that a lot of you are probably going to be keeping your eyes on. But let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe for more content just like this. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.